All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me now move on to the next fireside chat, which is on the net positive roadmap for responsible businesses. And we will have the privilege to welcome Mr. Andrew Winston, who is a thought leader in the sustainability area and a most widely read writer. And recently, he has co authored a book with Paul Polman of Unilever. The title is Net Positive, um, How Companies Thrive by Giving More Than They Take. So, and let me make an announcement that we were privileged because Andrew and Paul Pullman both are good friends of Asian Center for Corporate Governance. We could pull a coup that Andrew is in United States, Paul is in UK. We could still manage the signature of both of them on the book, and we have got some books, which I would love to, share. Any one of you would want to have that book, so please do write to me. With this, let me also invite Ms. Nainalal Kidwai to join us in this fireside chat. Can we have Naina also on the screen, please?
I'm very much around in your big screen. You want me on your...
Yeah, but Rasika, for you, can we have Ma'am Nainalal Kidwai on the...
But Mahendra, don't hold it up for this. Just
Okay,
a big welcome to Andrew. Delighted to be engaging with you. I have been in close touch with Paul over the years, from the time when he was on the Nestle board, and thereafter some of the work I've done with him when he was at Unilever. And delighted to engage with you, and indeed really enjoyed your book.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's good to meet you.
So once again, thank you for being with us. And let me start with my first question to you, Andrew, that since the theme of this summit is Net Positive Roadmap for Responsible Businesses, post-COP26, because barely one fortnight ago in Glasgow, the world leaders were tucked in and they were trying to review and keep the 1.5 degree alive. So how has the nature of corporate responsibility changed? And what do you think are the mega trends? Because you are an expert in catching the mega trends in the corporate responsibility space today.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me as part of the Asia Business Responsibility Summit, or I guess E-Summit this year. Like all of us, we're having our virtual versions, but it's really great to be able to be with you in India from my home in Connecticut. I think I heard in the last conversation, we have found some new practices in the last couple of years, and some of them are very, very helpful, right? We can meet and see other people, more people than we ever have. So thank you. And I think I'll just start by saying that I've been in this field for about 20 years now, after about 10 years in business, doing kind of normal business jobs before I got into sustainability. I was a strategy consultant and worked in media companies for a while. And the field, I think, depending how you define it or what we mean by sustainability or CSR, I think has changed more in the last couple of years than the previous 20 that I've been in it. I think the expectations of business have changed really dramatically, and the pandemic was clearly part of that, but it was already coming. The kind of infamous or famous statement from the Business Roundtable in the U.S. from CEOs of the largest companies in the U.S. saying that the company should not just pursue shareholder value, but stakeholder value. I don't think many companies changed because of that statement, but rhetoric and language matters, right? And the things we say are important do tend to evolve and change the way people think about business. So I think what's happened in the last few years is that, in a way, the initial battle, the one that all of us working in this field have been fighting for, to get companies to recognize this as a core issue, to see it as something they need to be addressing, I think that battle is over. And that's a big change, right? There's really everyone at the table now. I think, laws like India's forcing companies to put resources into CSR are part of the reason that has helped, and other laws in Thailand and places forcing transparency. But I think it's more been the social pressure, the change coming from the megatrends. And I'll just say quickly that what I spend my time kind of understanding and trying to help companies understand are these really big sweeping changes, most of which are moving almost exponentially. Some of them are. The biophysical changes like climate and biodiversity, those are the kind of existential challenges. And then the third kind of really big issue we face is inequality and growing inequality around the world. The good news, I guess, is that we've seen exponential change as well in the clean economy. The cost of doing business in renewable energy, batteries, efficiency, building efficiency, water efficiency, almost exponential reductions in cost. So that's enabled new solutions. On top of that, there's just these rising pressures from stakeholders. We've seen increasing demands for transparency. Technology has enabled that, but also generationally, the younger generations, the younger millennials, the Gen Z who are now entering the workforce, millennial and Gen Z are over half the workforce globally. They have a different view. So, you can see it in the surveys, you can see it in their attitudes, both quantitatively and anecdotally, that they believe business should be more than just profits, that they want values where they work. I think all of this is combined to make it nearly impossible for companies to avoid this topic, even if they're not comfortable with it yet. And I notice in the original language of Section 135, it defines CSR as voluntary action, which is technically true, but I think it's not voluntary anymore, and it's not voluntary in mostly good ways, meaning this is good for business. And so we can talk some more about kind of what Paul and I mean by net positive and where we're headed. But to me, those are the things that are driving this very deep change, and the pressure coming from the people surrounding a business, its stakeholders, mainly, I think, customers and consumers, its communities, and mainly employees. I think in the end, employees are becoming the really driving force for change because of those younger employees who want to find values where they work and even where they shop and who they buy from. All of that is coming together in a very powerful way, and I think many companies are not totally prepared, but that's okay. We're in this together. I think everybody has to move together.
Just a follow-up question before I hand over to Naina, Andrew, in 2019, the Business Roundtable in New York, the world leaders got together and they came up with a statement where they say that there was a shift from shareholder primacy to stakeholder democracy. Until 251st word of the statement given by BRT, the word shareholder did not appear. But what is the situation on the ground? What are the conversations you're hearing in that part of the world, from the business leaders on this shift?
Yeah, I don't think we should kid ourselves. As I said, I don't think the statement changed behavior necessarily, but I think the words matter. I think, as I said, the rhetoric matters, the placing of stakeholders as a larger goal. But the reality is, we're caught in a very tough and dangerous system, one that's built up over 50 years, right? The Milton Friedman statement that the purpose of business is just to create shareholder value. Even though there was more nuance to what he said originally, that was the kind of core of it. It's 50 years old, 51 years old. Pretty much exactly as old as I am. I've been in this world as long as his statement and Earth Day. I was born right around Earth Day in 1970, and it's a long time. It means that everybody in business has spent their entire business career, if they're 70 and under, hearing that this is the purpose. And it became really the core focus of business through the 70s and 80s. And so that's very hard, I think, to take that story and break it down and start to get executives to see that there's more to value creation. And in fact, I mean, I've been asked in interviews for 15, 20 years, well, how can a company do sustainability when it always costs more? I get some version of that question all the time. Or how can they do it when their fiduciary responsibility is to maximize shareholder value? That's nowhere written in fiduciary responsibility that you have to maximize shareholder value this month or this quarter, but that's what people believe. So my answer to what's happening on the ground is the pressures are really building and companies are navigating it while still feeling these chains. we have a quote in the book from Kumi Naidoo, who ran Greenpeace International and Transparency International. And he says, something to the effect of, he basically feels for these CEOs that they're trapped in the same system that demands this quarterly performance. The only constraints that are loosening a bit are the change in some of the rhetoric and discussion from the investment community. After basically decades of them not being a part of the sustainability conversation, they are now a force of pressure, right? The desire for ESG metrics. They want to understand the systemic risk of a business. That's not uniform, and I don't think the financial world knows exactly what they're asking yet, but the institutional investors are more evolved. So you're starting to see the breakdown. But for now, look, most CEOs are still feeling like they have to deliver in the quarter. So they might feel this pressure now and feel it morally and want to do better, but I don't think have an easy way out, which is why the subtitle of our book is about courage. I don't see a better way than just having the courage to push back. It's what Paul did. He just said to his investors, I'm not talking to you quarterly. He did that almost 12 years ago. And more CEOs, frankly, just need to follow it. They don't have to respond quarterly. It's not in the law, right? So it takes leadership, courage, and then, what we talk about quite a bit is, a collective courage. I think you need tipping points, right? We need 20, 25% of a sector to kind of be moving in a new direction to kind of bring everyone else along. And I think we're getting there, but the list of companies that seem to get it is still pretty short. Let's be honest with ourselves. It's the same list almost all the time. The Nestle's, the Unilevers, it's the Interface and IKEA, Patagonia, DSA. There's just the same list. Natura in Latin America, you've got this list of companies. It doesn't change that much, but I think we're on the verge of something kind of the dam breaking.
Thank
Andrew,
you
if I
very
could
much.
jump in here.
Yes, Nana, sorry.
I think you've sort of hit the nail on the head in terms of the contradictions which companies are finding hard to negotiate through. I think even those that embrace net zero, net positive, worry about what does it mean in terms of, yes, in the longer term, I believe performance will improve. But in the near term, if I have to invest more capital or do things differently, are those same financial investors who right now are saying that this is what they want to see from us, ready for reduced returns? So I think it is these contradictions that are going to be very hard. And you talk of quarterly reports, and I know how strongly Paul has felt about that and led the change. However, the other side of it is companies believe in the interest of transparency. They have to be right out there sharing things. So these are contradictions which are very difficult to navigate. And I do believe we're going to have to see much more collaboration across companies so that they lead the charge collectively, not in a one-upsmanship sort of game. So
Exactly.
To that end, if I might ask you the question on if responsibility is the starting point, and what other attributes of a company have to change? What are the key principles that net positive companies live by?
Great, thanks for the question. I will just say that quickly on that short-term pressure, the way Paul talks about it, I think is an important nuance, is he talks about stopping quarterly guidance. I think the main change really in his mind, there's still the legal requirements to have transparency as a public company, but it was about sitting down with investors and telling them what was going to happen in the next quarter, and providing this guidance quarter to quarter. And I think the framing we all need to worry about is always this question of, are we asking investors for reduced returns? And use the word investment, which is really the critical one. And there's something about the sustainability topic that has always faced, I think, an unfair burden or an uphill battle, where everything in business is an investment. The choices you make in marketing or R&D or human resources, they're all investments, right? There's nothing that's just like capital free. And yet, when you talk about it in sustainability, the assumption again is somehow it's draining value from the business. The head of marketing doesn't have to explain why there needs to be a marketing budget, but the sustainability people are always begging for budget. And that's why, again, your law is so interesting and powerful to just say you have to spend 2%. I haven't decided in all these years how I feel about it. Like, is it the best path or not? I don't know. I'm glad the experiment is out there. The risk to me seems like if you define it as 2%, then it can't be more, when the end goal here is that it's 100%, right? That the whole business is moving towards a positive impact. And that when you say that you're not trying to use the whole business towards positive impact, what are you doing, right? Are you draining value from parts of the world to create products or services? So the principles, to answer your question, it does start with responsibility, but the word we use synonymously, or probably more than responsibility, is ownership. You know, the idea of taking ownership of the mess you've made, or of the things you're doing well, the way we ask our children to, right? Take responsibility for how you impact the world. And that's really the core throughout the book, is that ownership of your extended responsibilities. The scope 1, 2, and 3 discussions on carbon start to get at that, right? To have companies increasingly look at their supply chain and customers, and that's becoming the norm. But there's, in the book, we talk about kind of scope 4, 5, and 6, and we didn't come up with those terms, but we kind of expand on them and say there's these broader views, and we can kind of dig into what that looks like in different sectors. The other 4 of the 5 principles are what I've kind of alluded to. Taking a long-term view, right? That has to be the focus, long-term value for business and society. Taking a multi-stakeholder view. So it's a multi-stakeholder model at its core. And the thing that results from that is kind of the 4th principle, which is shareholders do have value. We do create value for shareholders, but based on those first principles, taking ownership, taking a long-term view, and serving multi-stakeholders. And then finally, throughout the book, as you mentioned, we have to come together. It's a belief and a commitment to transformative partnership. The problems we face are just too big and too shared. There's no company big enough. There's no government big enough to tackle them on their own. We can only get to partial solutions without bringing along partners. So that's kind of the 5th, and in many ways most important, is that you believe in doing this together. And I have found, as the book's out there now for a month or 2 and started to have people really finish it and read it, that there is this sense of, oh, this is a really big agenda. How can we do this? Almost an anxiety level. And I remind people that you're not alone, right? That the whole point here is that you're moving together, that you need to, even with your peers and competitors, on a bunch of shared issues, shared problems, and shared solutions. So those are the kind of the core elements, I think, of what we hope will be a net positive movement.
So thank you, Andrew, for that. My thoughts go back maybe 30, 40 years back, and I see that quality movement had caught up then, and Japanese were ahead of the curve. And that time, most manufacturing companies around the world felt that, quality is costly. But the Crosbys and Demings of the world, they came up even, one of the book, I don't know who wrote it, but they say quality is cheap. I see exactly today, sustainability, most companies have a myth. They feel that sustainability is costly, they can't afford it. How should they rethink about how they invest and spend the money to explode this myth, that sustainability can have a high cost?
Yeah, not
following sustainability
right.
Can have a higher cost for them. Sorry.
I think part of what, again, is accelerating this is the dawning realization now that at both the macro and the micro level, the cost of inaction is far higher than the cost of action. That is finally starting to seep through, I think, at the policy level, on the largest issues like climate. The idea, as the kind of anti-climate or the go slow on climate people want to make us believe, that if we tackle climate, it'll, quote, destroy the economy. I think that's becoming pretty absurd on the face of it, to watch what happens to communities as they're burned, flooded, droughts, to say it's going to be more expensive to society to let this continue and accelerate is ridiculous. I think we're starting to understand that on social issues as well, that the inequality has a toll, that it has a very real expense. I've seen really interesting studies looking at the shared costs of inequality, having more homeless people and having people below poverty, and what that does to the cost of healthcare and the cost to society, all these kind of direct connections. So I think that's becoming clearer. But I will say on the micro level, kind of within companies, one of my focal areas for years has been just the discussion of how we think about investment decisions, and whatever you use, some version of return on investment, some calculation that says, is this a good investment? I think the tool is useful, but broken, in that we are always counting the I very clearly. Here's how much cash or how many people or whatever we need to invest to do something. And the R we measure maybe as direct sales or cash as well, and don't take into account 10 other sources of value that are all internalized. I'm not even talking about the societal value, the externalized value. I'm just talking about the value of building a company that's more resilient, a company with more strategic options, or optionality as they call it, the employee loyalty, the customer loyalty, the license to operate, and on and on. And so we don't make the kinds of decisions that we want to, and we have to think about not just, can you afford this, but how can you afford not to? How can you afford not to have products and services that are getting cleaner and more sustainable to satisfy customer needs? It's growing, right? This movement of transparency means people increasingly want to know what's in everything. How was something made? Who made it? Were they paid a living wage? What's the carbon footprint? And on and on. And if you don't have that story right, I don't think you're going to be relevant in the future. I mean, and you could see these transitions in other sectors over many years. It probably seemed expensive for, video chains to switch to streaming from making cassettes. And, like, it seemed expensive at the time. And then it became infinitely expensive not to, as their businesses disappeared. I think that's the same thing going on in fossil fuels, in cars. The switch to EVs is going to take huge investment. And so part of the way to get there is, like, Daimler just stopped investing in internal combustion engines 2 years ago. They switched the funds. They moved the direction of their investment and decided it's going to be too expensive not to do this. I think that's the way we have to talk about this. It's not only a myth, it's taking people down a path to irrelevance and far higher cost. And I think for many, not surviving.
Thank you. Naina?
So, Andrew, many companies have signed up to goals of net zero. Many of these are set, out into the future, as I guess is inevitable, as they align differently and make this big leapfrog that you've just described. But the issue here is, how do we know that they are indeed buying into that same goal they have set? And what are these metrics to ensure that this isn't some new form of brainwashing by a CEO who knows he just has a couple of years at the helm?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting challenge. I've heard rumors in companies of, executives basically saying, "Oh, we can talk about purpose. All those, young workers, they love that. We'll fool them," or something like, but we'll still pursue our profit maximization. Look, I think the goals are important. They really are. They do change the direction of a company, because most people within a company say, "Oh, okay, the goal is to cut carbon, 100% by 2050. We better figure this out." But I think there's steps that you need to see, right? You need also interim goals. This is part of what the Glasgow meeting was about at the country level, right? We need to start to see 2030, aggressive 2030 goals, 2040. So you're not just saying, if you just say our business will be net zero by 2050 and we'll be out of virgin plastics by 2050, and you have no intermediate pathway or no accountability given to anybody, to kind of, search for those solutions, no R&D, no partnerships, then yeah, I guess it's partly greenwashing. I mean, I guess you could call it that. I think it's often just companies haven't thought through the execution of it. But that's, to me, part of it is you have to see the commitment throughout the organization, and kind of a fluency in the executives, the CEO and hopefully the CFO, to talk about the things we've been talking about for your whole meeting, but things I've been talking about for half an hour, which is that this is value creation, right? I think if you're not talking about it in that way, if you're not talking about it as a source of core innovation for the business, for solving customer problems and serving them, it's going to stay on the outskirts, and it's going to be harder for you to be a part of it. And then finally, I'd look for this commitment to partnerships. If a company, especially multinational, isn't joining in with its peers through its trade organizations or through kind of direct partnerships, not engaging with NGOs and governments, it's going to be hard to believe that they're that they're committed, right? That they're really on their way. So those are the signs that I look for. And I think we're evolving, right? Companies are getting better at this. It's new territory for so many to set a net zero or even a net positive goal. That's pushing them pretty far. We believe in this because we believe it's the best for business, but we also think it's just the logic of the situation we're in globally. We just don't have much time. So the leaders really need to push past heading towards zero and getting into positive territory.
Just a related question in terms of technology, which has come up as technology and sustainability being tied in quite closely. But let's assume for a moment that there's a company that's got the right technology. Let's say it minimizes plastic waste, for example, some biodegradable packaging, which works. And the company's desire would be possibly to hoard that technology because it's what differentiates it. Where will we all come out, or is it going to be back to a Greenpeace and Kumi Naidu to ensure that technology gets shared? So, it's again, it's a very tough one for a company. It's spent on the
really
R&D and got all of that going. So any guidance on that?
Look, it's really hard, and it's something I've struggled with and evolved on, because my first book, Green to Gold, the subtitle was about creating competitive advantage. I mean, that's what we've been taught. That's part of that same kind of MBA learning for the last 50 years, is that it's all about competitive advantage. And I'll say a couple things. I mean, first, we talk about the issues we're trying to solve in the book, and say, like, we really shouldn't be competing on the future of humanity, right? Getting into a competition over technologies that reduce carbon effectively, that reduce inequality or improve well-being, solve human health issues. Who does that really serve to compete on those issues, right? And hold that back. That said, competition also does drive innovation and creativity, and new. If there weren't profits in pharma, maybe they wouldn't develop the drugs. But we have this, I think, challenge of talking about sustainability. For years, executives will say, well, I'd like to do this, but I don't want to go under. I don't want to be bankrupt. And it's like, and I'll be talking to a company that might have $10 billion in profit that year. There's a range between 10 billion and zero and going under, right? There's this huge range. And it's about, do you invest some of that profit in the shorter run for longer term value for all? But I'll say that the nuance in the book that was really kind of opened my eyes, really, in working with Paul and working this through with him, was the idea that even if you're sharing a technology or an idea or a process, and you get the whole sector to a place where they're more efficient, or they're using a better option, and we're moving the footprint down for, say, plastics, that some companies are going to be better positioned to take advantage of that than others. That if you have a company that's built for net positive, and those elements include starting with your purpose, having a clear purpose, having your people engaged, building trust and transparency with civil society and government, building partnerships, you will be more resilient. You will be quicker. And I think we saw that during the pandemic. Some were able to switch supply chains faster. They had more leeway. Unilever had far more leeway than some of its peers because of its model. It had more deep connections with its suppliers. It had more cash on hand. It was able to issue a bond at really great terms to kind of finance some of this change. It had the strategic and financial and organizational resilience and leeway. And I think that does provide advantage. Right? You are in a better position to move quicker, and to me, that's part of how you square this circle of sharing, but still taking advantage and being the one who moves the fastest and takes a bigger share, frankly, of the solution.
Interesting ideas. I think I'd like to repeat what I heard from Paul, because we had the privilege of having Paul also on a fireside chat a few months ago.
Yeah.
And he said we need net positive leaders. They are the ones who will make the companies net positive. And I would add, because taking the benefit of presence of Marvin King here, that we need net positive board members.
Yeah.
They should be asking the right kind of questions. So Marvin, can I invite you here and just to say hello to Andrew. Andrew is a thought leader, as you heard him for the last 30 minutes, me and Naina picking his brains. Marvin King is the chairman of our Global Advisory Board of Asian Center for Corporate Governance, and he has guided us for 20 long years. Today was 20th year, we cut the cake. So Marvin, say hello to Andrew.
Hello, Andrew, and I know Paul well, and he knows me. And we were together in London when Lady Rothschild launched her inclusive capital model. And so I have been pushing the question of acting in the best interests of the company, the long-term health of the company, for 30 years now.
You got me beat by 10.
If you think about it, the directors owe their duties to the company and not to shareholders or any particular stakeholder. And I find the statement of stakeholder capitalism quite worrying, because if directors had to act and meet the needs and expectations of each stakeholder, the company would go bankrupt. So you take account of the needs, interests, and expectations and concerns of your stakeholders. But likewise, the stakeholders must accept that the company has challenges, particularly because of the pandemic. And as a result, the board then makes decisions in the best long-term interests of the health of the company, which from time to time will prefer one stakeholder above another. But by understanding their needs, expectations, and concerns, you can explain to them why the board, the collective mind of the board, came to that decision. The same as in Europe, in advising companies to move from fossil fuel-driven plant and machinery to renewables. I've advised several companies to stop paying dividends for 2 years to increase the cash flow. And BlackRock and Larry Fink spoke to me, and they've invested more in those companies on the basis, here's a board that's actually applied its mind to the long-term health of the company and made that decision. And share prices haven't gone down, they've gone up.
Right.
So the world is starting to realize that this is a measure where the board as a collective has got to think on a unified matter. The board, when it thinks collectively, hopefully is singing from the same hymn sheet. Because in the past, when they sung from a hymn sheet, acting the best to increase the wealth of shareholders, and the criteria for success was increased profit, increased dividends, increased share price, there was the wrong focus. It wasn't in the long-term best interest of the company. In fact, the 20th century was a century of unsustainable development. So the world is changing, Andrew, and we know the IFRS has just formed the International Sustainability Standards Board. Europe has issued their corporate sustainability reporting directives, which will be mandated for 27 states. So the world is not what it used to be.
No, it's not. And I appreciate all of that. That's, I mean, we're in agreement clearly. And a lot in the book, we talk about this nuance or this challenge of you can't manage everything at once. You're not going to manage every stakeholder at once. You're optimizing for multiple stakeholder return over the long haul, but it doesn't mean you're answering to everyone at all times. And that there's times where you do, as you say, invest that factory for the time, may need to spend some money, switch over to solar, do some things. In another market, you might be working on community investment with a brand, and there's going to be different pathways, right, in different parts of the business. And I think, the distinction that to me is really important is it's not as much between shareholder and stakeholder as it really is about the long versus the short. Because in the long run, you are serving the shareholder. To do that, you need to serve your stakeholders. You need your customers to be happy. You need employees to be happy and attract and retain the best people, and on and on. So it really is about taking that longer view, and that short-term pressure is the biggest hurdle. It's the one that stands in the way of everything we're trying to do. So the more we can, I think, come together and have that collective courage to kind of push back on short term, the better off we'll be. So it's really good to meet you and hear about your work, and know more about what you're pushing for as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Andrew. I think that was very, very educative for our listeners, particularly for me. Thank you, Naina, for joining me. And ladies and gentlemen, can we have a big round of applause for Andrew Winston?
Thank you so much.